first block we're going to be making is called a Dutchman's puzzle. It is made up of sets of flying geese blocks. If you haven't already watched the tutorial on how to make the flying geese unit, you can find that on the website and on our group page. We will be making 4 of these units and then rearranging them to create our Dutchman's puzzle block. Okay, let's gather up our materials that we need for this project. The first thing you will need is 4 copies of the pattern. If you don't have a way to print it out, I'm going to show you how you can draw it with paper and pencil. You'll need scissors for paper and scissors for fabric. You'll want a glue stick, and this is an Elmer's washable glue stick, a postcard for folding your paper, and your fabric pieces. For the Dutchman's puzzle, I need 8 4x4 squares of my light, 4 4-inch by 7-inch pieces of my medium, and 4 4-inch by 7-inch pieces of my dark. Okay, some of you may not have a printer, or maybe you don't even have a computer, so let me show you how you can draw this pattern. This is the pattern we're going to be using, and you can see that it is made up of a square, and inside that square we have 2 flying geese units. So we're going to draw that out real quickly. Using your 6.5-inch ruler, simply draw that 6.5-inch square. And then you're going to move in 1/4 of an inch on all 4 sides. And you will end up with a 6-inch square. Now if you take a look at our original pattern, it's divided in half. So half of 6 inches is 3 inches. So let's find our 3-inch mark and draw that line. And that will give us our place where we can make our 2 units. We need to find the center. And remember, this was 6 inches, so the center will be 3 inches. I'm going to put just a little tick mark there and a little tick mark there. And then I'm going to connect from the corner up to that tick mark. And I'm going to do the same thing in the other direction, from the corner up to the tick mark. And then I need to do the same thing up top here. So I have drawn that same pattern that you can print out. You'll see that I need to add one more line, and that is this dashed line. It goes 1/4 of an inch up from the bottom of the top triangle. So I'm going to place my 1/4 inch mark on that bottom line of that triangle, and I'm just going to draw a dashed line, and that we need for fabric placement. So you have your pattern drawn out, and the first thing you want to do is number these lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we want to take our postcard and we want to fold on every line. I'm going to go ahead and cut some of this extra paper away from the outside. That's why I needed my paper cutting scissors. It's too much and it will be in the way as we begin sewing. I'm just using a postcard. You can use a business card, an envelope, a piece of cardboard, anything you have. And you're going to fold on line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, and line 5. And we're doing this now because it will be hard to fold it once we have fabric attached. So this is what we have. This is what it looks like from the back. All right. In order to get started, we need to begin with one of our 4" by 7" rectangular pieces. If we take another look at our pattern, we will see that the bottom flying goose unit is the dark one, and the upper one is your medium color. So I'm going to begin with a dark 4" by 7" rectangle. Okay, I'm going to take my first 4" by 7" rectangle, and I'm going to put just a tiny dab of glue on the back of it. Just a little smidge. And remember, this is washable glue, so it will come out later on. And then I'm going to center that pattern piece on top of there. And I want to go ahead and fold back at line number 3 and make sure I have plenty of fabric up above that line. And then I also need to make sure I have enough fabric here at the bottom to cover my seam allowance, and I do. So that's the first step. You can go ahead and do that on all of your pieces, or you can assemble one block at a time. It's entirely up to you. The glue stays in place pretty well, as you can see, and it's just enough to give us a little security so that our piece doesn't wander away as we're trying to cut it. Alright, now we have pre-folded these lines, so we're going to fold on line number 1 all the way back. And then we need to trim right down along that line. We need to add 1/4 inch of fabric. And you can see I've got my 1/4 inch line right on the edge of the paper, and I'm going to take the cutter and just cut right along that line to trim my fabric. Okay, you can see I have a chunk here that can be discarded, and here is the piece with the trimming done. We're ready to attach piece number 2, which will be a triangle that will fill this space. We get these triangles by splitting our 4" square diagonally. So let's split that 4" square on the diagonal. We're going to be real careful because we will be now working with bias seams which can stretch. So I have 2 equal triangles now. We are going to place right sides together, one triangle with the trimmed edge of our backing fabric or our main fabric. When I place this, I want to make sure that the bottom of the triangle is here at the bottom of my other fabric, and you can see that it's not. So I need to move that down just a bit. And I need to also make sure that the top of my triangle is above that number 3 fold. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to just carefully hold everything in place, open this back up, and fold that back down and make sure I have plenty of fabric above that fold. Okay, you can see I've got plenty of fabric here at the bottom. I'm aligned on my cut edge, and I have enough here above that number 3 fold. I'm going to carefully take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch right through the paper on this number 1 line. Now, because I'm going to be stitching right through the paper, my needle position doesn't matter as much. It can be in the normal centered position, or I can move it to that right hand position, which is my 1/4 inch mark. One adjustment I do need to make, though, is I need to move my stitch length way down. And I need to do that because it will make it easier to remove the paper when I'm done sewing. So we're going to stitch right through the paper from the corner to this point on the number 3 line. We're going to stitch right through that point out to this dotted edge or dashed line we drew. Here you can see, okay, here you can see that I have stitched right through that number 3 line out to the dashed line. I can now unfold this and press it in. Okay, it has now been pressed. You can see that I just folded it open and pressed it. And I need to make sure that it's in the right place before I attach my next piece. So I'm going to again fold on that number 3 line, and I'll have to gently tear that away from the paper. I'm going to again fold on that number 3 line, make sure that I have fabric above for seam allowance, and I do. So I'm in good position to add piece number 3. Piece number 3 is actually going under this number 2 triangle. And the way we do that is fold on the number 2 line, use the cutter, and cut away the excess fabric, that 1/4 inch. And use the other half of our square that we split diagonally to form the other triangle. Now notice I am leaving this open as I set this on. I need to make sure that I have fabric down here at the bottom edge, and I need to make sure that it goes above that point that was just formed by that last seam, and it does. So I am going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew it right through the paper on the number 2 line. Okay, again I have sewn right past that number 3 fold and up to that dashed line. I am ready to open this out and press it, and we will have our first flying geese unit complete. Okay, as I was pressing this, I noticed that something looked funny down in this corner. And this is a good thing to have happened because I can show you a mistake. Because we're beginning in this corner with our stitching, it's real easy for that little point to fold up on that triangle. So I'm going to have to rip that out and re-stitch that. Okay, so our first unit is done. It's been pressed. It's in good shape now. We're ready to add the next piece. If you'll remember from the pattern, our next piece will be our medium color, and in my case that's the red. In order to add this, I need to fold along line 3, I want to trim that 1/4 of an inch. So here's my 1/4 of an inch all trimmed up, and I'm going to place right sides together. I want to place the finished unit right sides together on my medium colored piece of fabric, and I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew right through line 3. Okay, I'm sewing right through line 3. I'm going to start at the edge of my paper on this outside edge. Remember, I'm using a short stitch length. I'm going to go right through the X where all the points meet at that intersection. And right off the other edge of the paper. Okay, you can see I sewed right through that intersection. Now I'm going to take it and press it. Okay, so I've sewn that seam. I'm going to press this open, and we should have almost a perfect point at that intersection. All right, this is what our finished unit looks like so far. You can see our point is almost perfect. Probably another thread length or 2 could have been allowed, but I think it'll pass. Now, our next step is to fold on line 4 and use the ruler and the cutter to cut away the excess fabric. Again, I'm lining up that 1/4 inch mark at the edge of the paper. That'll leave me a 1/4 inch of fabric on the outside edge, and I just cut along there. I need to make the triangles to do the corners. Remember, to make the triangle, we split one of our 4-inch squares diagonally. I'm going to place that triangle right sides together with the piece that I had just cut, and I need to make sure that the point extends to the edge of the paper. So the point of the triangle needs to go all the way out to the edge of the paper, and it also needs to go back far enough that it meets this seam line where we sewed number 3. So I think I've got it in a pretty good position. I'm going to line up the cut edge, and I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew it together. And this time I'm sewing right through the line at number 4. And I'm going all the way out to the edge of my pattern. Okay, so that has been folded back and pressed into place, and you can see we're building a pretty good unit here. The last thing we need to do to assemble this is fold on line 5. And you can see I'm going to have to pull this little bit here to loosen it. That's why we made our stitches so small. And I'm going to take my last triangle piece and attach it on line 5 by sewing through the line. I'm going to begin by trimming this to the 1/4. Okay, so this is what we ended up with. We're cutting right along this fold. This piece slides off, and you can see it is 1/4 of an inch past the white paper, and I keep repeating this because it is so important. You have to have enough fabric here to attach your next piece. You have to have an adequate seam line. Okay. Placing the right sides together. I'm doing it one-handed here. It's not working well. And we are going to sew. Remember, I need to be below this sewn seam line, and I need to be extended past the end of my main color piece, and I am. I'm going to put those in place and sew that. Okay, here is our untrimmed finished unit, and I want to point out something to you, and I don't know if you can see it in the video or not, but because of the way we're pressing these and our light color is on the outside, you can actually see, I hope you can see, a shadow of the dark color through that light. Can you see that? A little bit of red showing through there, showing through that light. I want to show you how to fix that. Simply fold this piece back, and you will see the red fabric that is too tall. You can just take your scissors, or you can take your rotary cutter and trim that red fabric so that it is short enough, and then it won't show through that seam. So here is that little smidge of fabric I had to cut off. But now, if we look through our seam, there's no red showing through. So it was really important to do that, especially when we're using these really bright colors with this really light color. You may be using more opaque pieces of fabric, but my white is pretty sheer. Alright, if you will remember, our block needs to be 6 1/2 inches. We drew that on the reverse side. Our outer set of lines is our 6 1/2 inch square. So we can simply trim right along those lines, and we have finished our first unit. We need to create a total of 4 identical units as this, and we'll be ready to assemble our Dutchman's puzzle block. So go ahead and create all of your units. I'll create mine, and we'll meet back here later to sew all of those together. Well, hopefully you got 4 units made so that you're ready to assemble your Dutchman's puzzle. Look at the way it goes together. All right, you can put it this way, which makes a square in the middle. But if you're really trying to get the Dutchman's puzzle, it actually makes a pinwheel in the center with your dark colors meeting. So you just join it as you would any other pinwheel block. Join the top 2 together, join the bottom 2 together, and then join on the cross seam. Remember to match your points, just like you did when you made a pinwheel block. And you will have a Dutchman's puzzle block made out of flying geese. Now, I want to show you something as I am sewing my block units together. I left my paper on the back. I had trimmed it on my outside drawn lines. I know that this mark inside is 1/4 inch, so I'm going to sew right down that line. And when I get finished, I should have perfect points without too much aggravation. Okay, here are my first 2 pieces sewn together, and I want to point some things out to you. I haven't yet removed the paper. I wanted to make sure that I had a good point here, and I do. I probably could have left a little bit more out of the seam allowance. I also wanted to make sure that I have this 1/4 inch here, and that this point matches up. And it does. You can see it comes together. And I have this 1/4 inch beyond that. The reason that these match so well is because when we sewed them together just now, the way we pressed our fabrics, these are self-nesting. They automatically nested together. So as I sew these next two and they nest together, then I should be ready to piece it all together easily. Okay, here is my finished Dutchman's puzzle. I hope yours turned out as nicely. You can see I did mess up my point just a tiny bit. I was trying to hurry and I didn't pin it, so I got it off just a tiny bit. But I'm going to call it good enough for right now. If I was making this quilt for a show, I definitely would take it apart and fix it. And I think just because this one's going to be probably used on one of our beds, I'm going to leave it. I don't usually do that, but we're going to this time. Now, because all of these blocks were 6.5 inches, and we took up a 1/2 inch, we should have a 12.5 inch block. So let's do the test and see. And look at that, 12.5 inches, and we don't even have to trim it. It's been pressed. I'm going to take the paper off the back, and then I'm going to try to press all my seams. I probably will not be able to press them in my normal circle because of the paper piecing, but I'm going to see if I can get them to at least be flat here in this area. I think I can at least take out these 2 little stitches and get this corner to open up and have this little star in the center that I want, which will help it lie flat. I hope you enjoyed making this block. I think it was a pretty easy block. It was a great way for you to learn paper piecing. Now you know how to do flying geese. The next block we're going to make takes flying geese to a new level because we're going to put them together to make a sailboat.